Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. When truth finally walks into the room, every lie that danced before it freezes mid-step. For years they laughed at you like you were the plot twist that forgot its own script. They watched your downfall like spectators at a circus, waiting for the lion to forget it was royalty. But time, that quiet, merciless historian, had other plans. It began writing your vindication in places even you didn't know were sacred. And now, something wild is happening. The same mouths that mocked your name are now using it as proof of truth. The irony is so rich, it could pay off their karmic debts. It's almost funny, isn't it? How they once treated your discernment like delusion, until reality started quoting you word for word. They called you dramatic when you spoke the unseen. But now the headlines, the conversations, even their own private fears are echoing your old words like déjà vu on repeat. It's as if the universe whispered, "Let's see who was really paying attention," and turned your pain into public evidence. Psychologists say the human mind rejects truth when it comes from an unexpected vessel. That's why your revelation had to come wrapped in ridicule first. So only those with real eyes could recognize it. What they dismissed as coincidence was actually confirmation unfolding. You weren't crazy, you were just ahead of schedule. And that's why the tables have turned so dramatically. Your name, once used as a punchline, now sounds like prophecy in their mouths. They're quoting you at dinner tables, referencing you in debates, sliding your wisdom into conversations like it's their own. Because deep down, they know the truth finally chose sides. This isn't revenge. It's revelation with a sense of humor. The same stage they built to discredit you has become your pulpit. And the same gossip they used as weapons now works as your marketing. You didn't just flip the script, you rewrote the genre. Now watch closely. Because when divine irony takes the mic, the applause doesn't come from the crowd. It comes from heaven itself. Number one, you became the living receipt of what they denied. They spent years calling you delusional, dramatic, or too deep. Every time you spoke truth, they rolled their eyes like you were reaching for something that didn't exist. You warned people about things they couldn't yet see, but because the proof wasn't immediate, they branded you a liar or a troublemaker. You weren't trying to prove you were right. You were simply speaking what your spirit knew. But here's the beauty of truth. It doesn't need approval. It only needs time. And now, the same people who mocked your insight are using your name as evidence. You became the living receipt of what they denied. When the storms you warned about finally hit, they had nowhere to hide. The situations you predicted, the betrayals, the exposures, the crumbling masks, started unfolding exactly the way you said they would. That's when the laughter stopped. Suddenly, your words weren't crazy talk anymore. They were reference points. The same ones who whispered behind your back are now whispering your name with reverence. They can't deny it. What you said came to pass, and that's what flipped everything. You didn't need a platform, a microphone, or a crowd to validate your vision. Your life became the proof. The universe moved in alignment with your words, confirming that you weren't lucky. You were chosen to see ahead of the curve. What they thought was arrogance was actually awareness. You weren't guessing, you were guided. You were walking in a frequency most people couldn't tune into because they were too distracted by noise, ego, and comfort. Now, when they tell stories, they reference your name. That's what your name was saying all along. You became the proof that discernment ages well, that what's ridiculed in one season becomes respected in the next. It's a full circle moment they didn't see coming. Their disbelief became your documentation. Every insult they threw at you turned into a timestamp that confirms the authenticity of your insight. That's what happens when divine truth moves through human resistance. It gets mocked first, misunderstood second and honored last. You didn't force them to believe. Reality did that for you. And now your existence stands as quiet but undeniable evidence that when truth finally matures, it always points back to its original messenger. Number 2, they tried to erase you, but ended up highlighting you. They wanted to erase you so badly that they ended up engraving your name deeper into the timeline. Every lie they told, every rumor they spread, every smear campaign they launched, all of it was supposed to make people forget you ever existed. But instead, it built an unshakable trail of evidence. The more they tried to bury you, the more they exposed you. Their attempts to destroy your image became the reason people started investigating who you really were. And the truth, once hidden under layers of distortion, started shining brighter with every attempt to silence it. What they didn't understand is that defamation has an expiration date, but integrity doesn't. Lies fade when people start paying attention to patterns, and you, without even trying, became a pattern that couldn't be denied. Every person who repeated a false story about you unknowingly documented their own deception. Every fake accusation became a permanent record of who they were, not who you were. And when the smoke cleared, there you were, standing untouched by their narratives, glowing with the quiet strength that only endurance can produce. It's funny how things work out. They thought they were writing your ending, but they were actually drafting your legacy. Every time they tried to delete your name from the conversation, someone else brought it back up. Not to mock you this time, but to question why you were treated so harshly in the first place. The same gossip they spread in hatred became breadcrumbs leading straight to your vindication. They handed you immortality while trying to hand you shame. Now when people look back, the truth is obvious. The ones who tried to destroy you look bitter, repetitive, and desperate. You, on the other hand, look unbothered, refined, and wiser for the experience. You didn't have to fight to clear your name. Time did it for you. Because time always exposes intention. And when the motives of others get revealed, the light naturally finds its way back to the one who stayed true. They built your monument without realizing it. Their lies were the bricks, their obsession the cement. What was meant to erase you became the very structure that immortalized you. And now, when people trace the story, your name isn't found in the dirt. It's engraved in the foundation. Number 3, you didn't defend yourself. You let reality testify. You didn't fight to prove your innocence or argue to convince anyone. You simply let life unfold. You understood that truth doesn't panic, it performs. While they were busy talking, you were busy transforming. They wanted a reaction, but you gave them results. They expected you to crumble under pressure, to lash out, to defend yourself like someone desperate to be believed. But you didn't need to defend what was real. You just let reality take its time to testify. And when it finally did, it spoke louder than any words ever could. They mistook your silence for weakness because they couldn't comprehend a peace that powerful. In their world, people scream when they're right and lie louder when they're wrong. But you chose to stay grounded, knowing that arguments only feed the illusion. You didn't chase rumors, you outlasted them. You didn't try to fix every story because deep down you knew the truth didn't need rescuing. It needed witnessing. You gave it that. You allowed time, not emotion, to do the explaining. And in doing so, you let the universe set up the perfect reveal. The moment reality started aligning with your truth, their confusion turned into quiet guilt. They remembered the things you said, the warnings, the boundaries, the calm refusals, and suddenly it all made sense. You didn't have to revisit old conversations. Life replayed them for you. People who once ignored your words now replayed them in their minds, realizing how every accusation against you collapsed under the weight of evidence. The very situations they used to discredit you ended up validating you. That's the divine irony of restraint. You gave them nothing to twist, nothing to feed on, nothing to use. You left space for truth to echo naturally, and when it finally did, it didn't just clear your name. It elevated your presence. It showed that you weren't surviving the chaos. You were mastering it. You weren't being quiet out of fear. You were being still out of strategy. And now, those same people who thought your silence meant surrender finally understand. You weren't avoiding the fight. You were letting the facts do the fighting for you. Time became your witness, and truth became your revenge. Number 4, you became the standard they secretly measure truth against. They used to dismiss your insight like it was noise, too bold, too unconventional, too uncomfortable. You spoke truths that didn't fit the script they were trained to follow, so they labeled you the outsider. But now, those same people secretly measure everything against what you said first. When someone new shares an idea, they compare it to your voice, your style, your lens. You became the reference point they pretend not to notice. You became the standard they can't publicly admit they use. It's a strange kind of justice, and not loud or dramatic, but quietly undeniable. They can't erase the blueprint you created. You were the one who said things before they were trending, who understood patterns before they were recognized. You were laughed at for seeing what was coming, but time caught up to your vision. Now your perspective is the ruler by which they test what's real and what's performative. Even when they don't credit you, they echo you. You can hear it in their tone, in their phrasing, in the way they now discover truths you laid down long ago. What they used to call arrogance, they now call awareness. What they mocked as too deep, they now call wisdom. They've realized your insight wasn't about being clever. It was about being connected. You weren't trying to be right. You were being real, and now they can't shake that. Your words linger in their heads when they speak. Your approach shapes their delivery. You've become their unspoken compass, the invisible bar they measure themselves against. The hierarchy flipped without you even trying. You stopped seeking validation and started walking in self-assurance, and that's when they realized they needed your language to stay relevant. You became the syllabus they secretly study from, the tone they attempt to mimic, the clarity they try to claim. You turned rejection into instruction without lifting a finger. Now, when truth enters the room, it sounds like you. Your influence became so deeply woven into the atmosphere that they can't separate your essence from the enlightenment they chase. You didn't fight for recognition, you became the reference. And that's the kind of victory no title or acknowledgement can ever compete with. Number 5, your exile became their enlightenment. When they pushed you away, they thought they were cutting you off from influence. They assumed your silence would equal your disappearance, that isolation would break your spirit and erase your voice. But what they didn't realize is that separation was your initiation. The exile they designed to destroy you became the classroom where your wisdom matured. You weren't losing connection. You were gaining clarity. While they were busy performing for approval, you were deepening your understanding in secret. The space they thought would swallow you became the soil where you took root. In that quiet wilderness, you didn't just survive, you evolved. The noise stopped, and suddenly you could hear the deeper frequency of truth that most people never slow down enough to catch. You started seeing patterns, decoding behaviors, and gaining revelation about life, people, and purpose. You learned that isolation isn't punishment when it's divine. It's protection, while your mind and spirit expand beyond the ordinary. You weren't being hidden because you were irrelevant. You were being refined because you were essential. Now, the irony is almost poetic. The same people who once mocked you for being alone now borrow your language to sound insightful. They use phrases you birthed in pain as if they discovered them in peace. They quote your mindset without understanding the process that produced it. Your wilderness became their wisdom. They don't even realize the words they speak to sound spiritual are fragments of your survival notes. You disappeared in what looked like disgrace, but that disappearance was your transformation. You came back different, quieter, sharper, and carrying a weight that can't be faked. Your experiences turned into codes of discernment, and your scars became scriptures that now guide others. The world sees the end result, but not the lonely evolution that built it. That's the beauty of divine exile. It never ends in emptiness. It ends in enlightenment. You were removed so you could remember who you are without interference. You were stripped of noise so you could hear God in stereo. And when you returned, they didn't just see a person. They encountered revelation walking. What they thought was your ending became the moment their understanding began. Number 6, they laughed at you until life quoted you word for word. They laughed like your warnings were fairy tales, like your intuition was paranoia. You were too intense, too suspicious, too spiritual. Every time you spoke truth that didn't fit their comfort zone, they smirked and dismissed you. But you never spoke from fear. You spoke from foresight. You weren't guessing. You were reading the spiritual weather while everyone else was busy pretending it was always sunny. And now, one by one, those same people are facing the exact situations they once mocked you for speaking about. Life has started quoting you word for word, and suddenly the laughter sounds hollow. There's a special kind of silence that fills the room when realization hits, when people start remembering the very things you said that they swore would never happen. You didn't chase validation or try to remind anyone of your warnings. You simply let time be your confirmation, and time, as always, told the truth. It revealed that your exaggerations were actually predictions, that your overreactions were revelations. You weren't trying to be right. You were trying to prepare them, but because they couldn't see what you saw, they mocked what they couldn't understand. Now, the irony writes itself. The people who called you crazy are living the consequences of the patterns you tried to expose. The same world that ridiculed your discernment is now repeating your phrases as if they came up with them. They're starting to speak your language, not because they studied it, but because experience has forced them to. You didn't seek revenge. Reality became your greatest advocate. The truth came full circle, and without you lifting a finger, every insult became a prophecy fulfilled. That's the thing about divine timing. It doesn't rush to defend you. It lets life do it naturally. What they used to laugh at, they now lean on. What they used to reject, they now repeat. You didn't change your message. You just outlasted the mockery. And that's when the real shift happened. Because once reality starts echoing your words, the conversation is no longer about who was right. It's about who was ready. Number 7, you became the mirror. They can't escape. Your growth forced people to face themselves, and that's what unsettled them most. You didn't change in a way that made you unrecognizable. You changed in a way that made them uncomfortable. Your transformation became a mirror, reflecting back everything they tried to hide beneath pride, ego, and excuses. Every version of you they laughed at, mistreated, or underestimated has now evolved into living proof that they were never judging you. They were avoiding themselves. You became the mirror they can't escape, because your light now exposes their shadows without you saying a single word. It's not that they hate you. They hate what your evolution makes them feel. Your progress dismantles their denial. When they see how far you've come, it confronts the stagnation they tried to justify. When they hear your name, they remember the moments they doubted you, the words they used to break you, and the chances they had to treat you better. Your name no longer represents a person, it represents proof. Proof that growth is possible, that grace is real, and that pretending not to see truth doesn't make it disappear. Every encounter with your energy now carries a quiet conviction. Some people can't even look you in the eye anymore, not because you're intimidating, but because you're accurate. Your peace reminds them of their chaos. Your self-control highlights their impulsiveness. Your healing makes their bitterness harder to justify. You became a walking audit of their integrity, and every time your presence enters the room, their unresolved guilt resurfaces. You don't have to say a word. Your existence tells the whole story. The irony is that the very people who tried to dim your light now squint when it shines. They built narratives to make you small, but your growth made those stories collapse under their own weight. You outgrew their perception, and now your evolution plays on repeat in their conscience. That's the quiet revenge of authenticity. It doesn't scream or boast. It simply lives so truthfully that it forces everyone who doubted you to reckon with what they denied. You didn't just rise, you revealed. And now your life itself has become the mirror they can't turn away from, because deep down they know it's not you they see. It's everything they tried to avoid within themselves. Number 8. They used to say, "Who do you think you are?" Now they ask, "How did you know?" They used to throw that question at you like an insult. Who do you think you are? It was their way of shrinking your confidence, of trying to make your certainty look like arrogance. Every time you spoke truth that stretched beyond their understanding, they treated it like a joke. You were doing too much, thinking too highly of yourself, or trying to act special. They couldn't see that what guided you wasn't ego, it was alignment. You weren't claiming superiority, you were following instruction. But now that the things you said have unfolded with precision, the question has changed. They no longer challenge your authority. They inquire about your accuracy. How did you know? That shift in tone tells you everything. It's not just that they believe you now. It's that they recognize something greater was operating through you. They realized your insights weren't random thoughts. They were revelations. You didn't predict, you perceived. You weren't guessing your way through life. You were being guided step by something divine. And what they once called coincidence has become confirmation stacked upon confirmation. They're seeing that your knowing wasn't luck, it was leadership from above. What's striking is how life humbled the same mouths that once mocked your awareness. When they saw your discernment come to life, the laughter stopped. The events that played out proved your sensitivity wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. They realized that what looked like overthinking was actually spiritual foresight, that your hesitations were warnings, not fears. Now they're curious about your peace, your perspective, your process, the very things they used to ridicule. The mockery turned into respect, and the disbelief turned into quiet confession. That's what happens when truth matures. At first it sounds foolish, then it becomes undeniable. And once it manifests, even the skeptics start studying it. They can't explain how you knew. They just know you were right. You didn't get there by intellect or luck. You got there by obedience. That's what separates intuition from divine instruction. Intuition guesses, divine instruction guides, and that's what they finally understand. You weren't trying to be seen. You were simply following what was already written for you. Number 9. You became the proof that prophets don't need platforms. You never needed a stage to make your voice matter. Your life became the message. While everyone else was busy building audiences, you were building alignment. You didn't preach for applause or attention. You lived what you spoke. And that's what gave your words weight. People may not have liked you, but they couldn't deny that your discernment was accurate. You were consistent long before you were recognized. You didn't talk about integrity. You demonstrated it. You didn't quote wisdom. You embodied it. That's why your message carried power, even without a microphone. You proved that real prophets don't need platforms. They just need purity. Your credibility wasn't built on who shared your posts or how many people followed you. It was built on how reality kept confirming what you said. The universe echoed your insight through events, signs, and outcomes that no algorithm could manipulate. You didn't have influence because of exposure. You had exposure because of influence. People started realizing that your words weren't random opinions. They were reflections of higher alignment. You didn't need to convince anyone. You just needed to stay true. And because you did, your message began traveling further than you did. People started quoting you without giving credit, repeating your thoughts as if they were their own, using your revelations to sound enlightened. But even when they didn't mention your name, your essence was still there. That's the mark of divine authenticity. It transcends ownership. When something is sacred, it can't be contained. Your insight carried that kind of frequency. That's why it spread. That's why it stuck. The irony is that while many chased platforms to sound important, your absence made you louder. Your silence carried authority. You didn't need to announce yourself because life itself announced you. People didn't follow you because of branding. They followed because of resonance. And now your words are treated like scripture, not because you demanded reverence, but because truth stamped its seal on your spirit. You didn't chase validation. You became verification. You proved that when someone is truly chosen, their impact doesn't depend on visibility. The message doesn't need a stage, it just needs a vessel. And you became that vessel, ordinary in appearance, but carrying something unmistakably divine. Number 10, you shattered their illusion of power by surviving without their approval. They truly believed that if they controlled your image, they could control your outcome. They assumed your value depended on their validation, that if they tarnished your name, the world would forget you. They didn't realize that reputation and purpose don't answer to the same master. Reputation lives in people's mouths. Purpose lives in God's plan. So when you kept rising despite their sabotage, the illusion of their power started crumbling. You shattered it simply by surviving without their approval. They had built their whole identity around the belief that approval equals authority. That if they were the gatekeepers of opportunity, then they were the authors of destiny. But you exposed the flaw in that thinking. You thrived without their open doors. You prospered without their platforms. You grew in the dark, far from their recognition. And that's what broke their control. Because once someone learns to live without human permission, they become untouchable. You didn't just escape their grip. You rendered their influence irrelevant. Your resilience confused them. They watched you take hit after hit, expecting you to beg for acceptance, but instead, you turned pain into purpose. You weren't bitter. You were becoming. You didn't chase seats at their tables. You built altars instead. And when favor began showing up in places they never invited you to, they realized something they didn't want to face. You were never running on their system. You were powered by grace, not gossip. That's the moment the illusion of their power shattered completely. They saw that the titles, the clicks, the influence, none of it could create what you carry. Because divine favor can't be fabricated. It's earned through obedience, not popularity. They finally understood that applause doesn't grant authority. Assignment does. Now you've become living proof that real power isn't about being accepted. It's about being chosen. You exposed that the system they built thrives on fear and validation, while you thrive on alignment and truth. They used to think cutting you off would end your story. But instead, It highlighted the source of your strength. You didn't just survive without their approval, you flourished. And in doing so, you proved that no human hand can shut a door God Himself has unlocked. Number 11. You were the undeniable evidence that purity outlasts politics. They tried to bury you under politics, not the kind written in books, but the silent kind whispered in rooms full of hidden agendas and smiling faces. They used gossip like a sword and alliances like armor, believing corruption could outmaneuver character. You didn't play their game. You chose integrity over influence, truth over theatrics, and stillness over schemes. They mistook your quietness for weakness, not realizing that purity has its own kind of power, the kind that doesn't fade when the lights go out. They relied on manipulation to rise, but you relied on alignment. You didn't bend the truth to fit into rooms. You let truth build a room around you. And when their false alliances began to crumble, your consistency remained unshaken. You weren't loud, but you were lasting. You weren't performing, you were proving. While they obsessed over image, you preserved essence. And that's what made you dangerous. In the end, the politics collapsed under its own weight. The ones who once seemed untouchable got tangled in the very webs they spun. The masks fell. The stories unraveled. But you stood untouched, not because life didn't test you, but because you refused to contaminate your soul to win. You became the proof that real purity doesn't just survive corruption, it exposes it. Your life turned into evidence that truth doesn't need strategy, it just needs to endure. Now, even your silence carries authority. They speak your name with the kind of reverence that only comes after regret, not because you won in their system, but because you outlasted it. You didn't gain power by pleasing people. You gained it by staying pure when it cost you everything. You walked away from tables that would have fed your ego but starved your spirit. And that's why God elevated you beyond their reach. You were never campaigning for recognition. You were cultivating righteousness. And when the curtains finally fell, everyone saw the difference between performance and purity. They had influence, but you had integrity. And in the end, influence fades, but integrity becomes legacy. You didn't just outlast the politics, you redefined what power really looks like. Number 12. They tried to make you a cautionary tale. You became a case study in resurrection. They paraded your pain like a warning sign. They wanted your story to scare people into obedience, to make your name synonymous with failure, rebellion, or divine punishment. You were supposed to be an example of what happens when you don't bow, when you don't play small, when you refuse to fit into the box they built for you. But life had a plot twist they didn't prepare for. You didn't stay down. You rose, quietly at first, then boldly, until the same people who whispered about your downfall started taking notes from your resurrection. They said, "Don't end up like them." Now they're saying, "How did they do it?" Your suffering became a syllabus. Your journey, once mocked and misunderstood, is now studied like a survival manual for the spiritually awakened. You became the blueprint for those who fell and thought it was over. Because your comeback wasn't about revenge or validation, it was about revelation. You showed that what they call an ending, God calls an edit. Your downfall forced you to unlearn dependence on applause and approval. It stripped you of illusions and left you with essence. And when you rebuilt, you didn't rebuild from ego. You rebuilt from enlightenment. That's why your rise looks different. It's not powered by pride. It's fueled by purpose. You didn't come back with bitterness. You came back with blueprint. Your wounds became wisdom. Your silence became a strategy. Your exile became evidence that death, in any form, is never final when your assignment isn't complete. Now the very same story they used to humiliate you is being retold as inspiration. Your name, once a warning, now carries weight. not because of what you survived, but because of how you transformed in the process. You became living proof that failure is only fatal to those who worship perception. They tried to bury you in shame, but resurrection rewrote the narrative. You didn't just recover, you reinvented the meaning of recovery. You turned humiliation into higher education. You flipped the moral of their cautionary tale, because what they meant to discourage others has now become the reason so many believe again, not in perfection, but in divine rebirth. You are no longer the warning, you're the testimony. Number 13, the same mouths that lied about you now quote you to sound wise. It's funny how the same mouths that once distorted your truth now echo it word for word. They lied, twisted, exaggerated. Yet somewhere along the line, they started borrowing your language to sound intelligent. Your tone, your rhythm, your insight, all repackaged as their own. They used to call you crazy, dramatic, or too deep, but now your words have become the very vocabulary they use to seem enlightened. It's poetic justice at its finest. They couldn't kill your truth, so they started quoting it. They mimic your mannerisms, repeat your ideas, and even watermark your wisdom with their own names. But truth has a spiritual fingerprint, an undeniable vibration that can't be forged. It carries the scent of authenticity, the cadence of divine experience. So even when it's copied, people can feel the difference. That's why no matter how many times they repeat you, it still points back to you. The echo only exposes the origin. The imitation only highlights the anointing. At first it stung, hearing your truth on their tongues after they ridiculed you for it. But now it's almost poetic, because without realizing it, they became your amplifiers. They broadcasted what they once buried. They spread your message while pretending it was theirs. And life has a sense of humor, because every time they speak what you once lived, they testify on your behalf without knowing it. Their imitation is the confession. Their plagiarism is the proof. They wanted credit without character, revelation without refinement, wisdom without warfare. But what they fail to realize is that revelation isn't just information, it's transformation. You earned your insight through fire, not filters. Your wisdom came from scars, not seminars. They can copy your words, but they can't copy your becoming. That's why your essence remains untouchable. So let them quote you. Let them pretend they don't remember where it came from, because every borrowed truth still vibrates with your signature frequency. Every time they try to sound like you, the universe gently reminds them who originated it. You don't have to say a word. Your truth speaks fluently in every echo. Number 14, your existence became the proof that God plays long games. They thought they were watching your downfall, but heaven was simply taking notes. Your pain wasn't punishment, it was preservation. While they were celebrating your so-called failure, God was setting the stage for a return so undeniable that even your enemies would have to admit it was divine. You weren't being humiliated, you were being archived. Every betrayal, every rumor, every delay was carefully recorded, so that when the tables turned, no one could deny who had been favored all along. The truth is, God doesn't rush vindication. He lets lies run laps just to tire themselves out. He allows distortion to feel victorious for a season, because real evidence needs time to mature. While they were busy spreading false narratives, heaven was writing your receipts. That's why when your breakthrough finally came, it wasn't random, it was referenced. Every tear, every loss, every moment of silence became part of your divine documentation. You didn't just reappear. You resurfaced as proof that God keeps meticulous records. They wanted your story to end in shame, but God was building a storyline so precise that even skeptics had to admit this was no coincidence. You became the living contradiction to their conclusions. They thought delay meant denial, but it was divine timing in disguise. Because when God plays long games, he doesn't just restore, he reverses perception. He turns the mockery into memory, the exile into evidence, and the test into testimony. Now your very name disrupts deception. Your story has become uncomfortable for those who once used it as gossip, because every time it's mentioned, it exposes their premature judgment. You became proof that truth doesn't expire. It just matures in silence until it's undeniable. The same people who thought you were finished now have to confront the fact that heaven never stopped writing. Your life teaches one powerful reality. God doesn't lose in the short term, he wins in the long arc. The setup was strategic, the silence was sacred, and the outcome? Surgical. You didn't just survive the waiting, you became evidence that divine justice is patient, precise, and public. Truth took its time, but when it returned, it brought the receipts. In the end, chosen ones, your story became the revelation everyone needed but didn't see coming. They tried to define you, confine you, and erase you, yet you became the very evidence that truth can't be buried, only planted. Every betrayal turned into a seed, every exile became a chapter, and every silence became a sermon. You weren't being punished, you were being positioned. You weren't losing, you were being documented by heaven for a moment only divine timing could unlock. You didn't just survive, you inverted the entire narrative. What was meant to disgrace you ended up glorifying the very essence of who you are. They used your name in mockery, but now they use it to measure truth. They called you delusional, but now they call you ahead of your time. And the beauty of it all, you never had to fight for recognition. Your results spoke for you. You became the proof that divine authenticity outlasts every false storyline, every rumor, every imitation. Your journey shows the world what happens when God's timing meets human resilience. The same ones who thought you were finished now use your story to inspire others. The same mouths that lied about you now echo your words to sound wise. And the same system that tried to exile you now quietly studies your blueprint. You flipped the script not by force but by faith, not by power but by presence. Because when heaven endorses your purpose, no human opinion can cancel your impact. Every moment of pain was a prophecy in disguise. Every misunderstanding was a mirror exposing the difference between illusion and insight. You became living proof that purity outlasts politics, that resurrection follows ridicule, and that divine timing makes even your humiliation holy. The truth didn't just return, it returned wearing your name. So if this message resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Someone out there needs to be reminded that divine vindication is never late. It's layered. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share this video with someone who's walking through their own storm. Because your voice could be the reminder that the long game of God always ends in glory. And when it's your turn, the same mouths that doubted you will declare, they were right all along. God bless you.